Today on Everyday Injustice, we are pleased to have Gary Tyler. He is the author of the book Stitching Freedom. And I think for him, that was a literal event in his life, which we're going to talk about shortly. So, welcome to the show, Gary.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate being invited.
So, right behind you, I see you have all your books laid out.
Yes. It's
So,
it's all about promotion, Hey, that's what
yeah,
it's
of
about.
course. I want to really kind of get into your story. It starts in 1975, and I was like two
No
years.
correction.
Oh, here
It
we go.
start October the 7th, 1974.
Oh, there we go. All right.
Yes.
Well, I was just gonna say, in 1975, I was 2 years old.
Oh, okay.
And how
That's where
long?
yes.
Yeah. And you were finally released in 2016. So in 2016, I would have been 43. So from the time I was two until the time I was 43, you were incarcerated.
Yes. Yes, for 41 and a half years.
Yeah, I like to illustrate that so that people can kind of get an idea of just how long that is.
Oh, yes, that's 15,180 days.
See, he's figured out the days. All right. So let's start by just kind of telling your story, how you ended up in the infamous Angola, and then we'll kind of go from there.
October 7th, 1974, just like any other school day, a typical Monday after a long weekend. I, along with other youth, anticipated going to school. Normal day that we assume, although, systemically, that we experience racism on a daily basis, rejection, but we didn't let that deter us from pursuing our education. And also, as young people, try to live a joyous life. So that Monday came, went to school, and about 10, 15 minutes after being, you could say, on school grounds, that's when I hear my name along with another student name to report to the principal's office. And of course, I had a weird feeling that this is gonna be a bad day for me. All right. And because of an incident that happened that Friday night that was on the 4th of October. And as I went to the principal's office, that's when I encountered the principal suspending a friend of mine's and telling him he must leave the school grounds. So when he saw me, he told me to come into his office. So when I went in his office, he just outright told me that he was suspending me for 3 days. And I said, for 3 days? He said, yes. He said, because the teacher reported that you cause problems in the classroom and that you never show up. So when he said that, I immediately snapped and said, how could I cause problems in the classroom if I'm never there? So I caught him in a lie. I mean, the expression on his face. So he just out say, well, I'm suspending you for 3 days. I said, just like that. He said, yes, you leave the school ground, don't call the police on. So I said, you're gonna give me a pass to show that I was suspended. And he said, yes. So he told the secretary, give me a pass, and I got the slip and I left. And the guy that I mentioned, who was my friend, who was also suspended, him and I met on the River Road, and we hitchhiked back to Preston Howard. So I looked at it, well, this is a day that I could just lay back, and 3 days are gonna be just, you understand, a relaxing day, relaxing 3 days for me. But it didn't turn out that way. Fast forward, when I went home, there was a guy that I knew, friend of the family. He had just got a job that day, and he asked me to come with him to New Salt Peak, the way he could get some clothing. That's where his family lived. I was kind of reluctant, but I, of course, as a friend, I agreed. So I went with him, and we hitchhiked. We hitchhiked from St. Rose to New Salt Peak. And after he got, retrieved some clothing from his mother's house, we got back on the river road to hitchhike. And there was a PE teacher from New Salt Peak Middle School who took and picked us up and told us that he wasn't going no further than the red and white store. So we said, okay, that was good. So after he dropped us off at that school, we got back on the river road. And then this inconspicuous car pulled up with no marking. And it was police officer by the name of BJ St. Pierre and Mike Babin. BJ St. Pierre got at the car and patted us down and told us to get in his vehicle. And he brought us to the school. And he saw this principal, the existing principal, and he asked the principal, well, we're the ones that caused the problems. And the guy looked and the guy said, no, say Gary Tyler was suspended this morning from school, that they're not the ones. So the guy told us to get, out of his car, effing car, of course. He was quite belligerent. So we had decided that whether we hitchhike back or catch the bus, because it was apparent that the school was closing because the buses was coming in and the kids was leaving. So we decided that since I had a brother, that my brother Terry, and also a couple of cousins, that I'm gonna go try to get them where we all could get on the bus together to make sure that they were all right. Same with the guy Uric. So as we turned the bend, that's when we saw you could see kids being gathered in front of the gym. So as we walked that way, that's when they ushered us on a bus, on stand bus 91. So we got on the bus. I mean, the bus was crowded, it was packed. And but you can see before you even got on the bus, you can see that every bus that passed through like this crowd going down this road, it came under attack. So we kind of like said, okay, that, we're gonna go through that, as you say, that pallet whack, the same encounter that many other we could say school buses went through. And sure enough, as we went to proceed, that bus came under attack. And then all of a sudden, there was this pop sound. And everybody on the bus panicked. It was like pure pandemonium. And everybody started rushing to the front and stating that they're shooting at us. And the bus driver, of course, he stopped. And as he was getting off to check, see what was going on, that's when the officers forced him to drive the bus and put it on pedestrian hand drive. And that's what he did. And that's when police started rushing on the buses, at least on the bus that we was on, and told all of us to stay seated, and that and one by one they started taking us off the bus. So as I got off the bus, they patted me down and searched me, made me took off my hat and stuff like that. So, and they were putting us in this vacant parking lot that was across the ditch. So as I proceeded to jump across the ditch, then instead, as I turned around, I saw Officer Mike Babin arresting my cousin Ike. And when I told him, I asked Ike what was going on, he told me that the officer was arresting him because he had a 22 bullet with a chain on around his neck. And I said, there's nothing wrong with that. That's nothing illegal about it. So I said, officer, you didn't tell me anything about the one that I had around my neck. So that's when he gestured for me to come back across the ditch. As I proceeded, that's when officers drew their weapons on me. And then that's when we started having words back and forth. And one thing led to another. And then that's when one long officer walked up to me and asked me, what is your problem, son? And of course, we being young at the time and kind of flip out of mouth. I responded that I had a father, and that I see my fathers every day, you know. And he didn't like my response, and he said, "Well, son, I'm arresting you for disturbing the peace and interfering in police officers' duty." And he arrested me, and of course, we had to go back through the same crowd that attacked the bus. And as we was going through the crowd, that's when the crowd kind of converged on us. And an officer who had me, he had this pistol. He kind of like leaned it on my shoulder and he started paying. That's when I started ducking, telling him to move the gun, move the gun. And that's when, you know, luckily, police officers, they ran up and, you know, dispersed the crowd and they put me in his vehicle. And as I sat in this parked vehicle, that's when a student that I was in classroom, you know, in class with, he approached the officer and asked the officer, a white guy, you know, he asked him all what I was arrested for. And the officer told him I was arrested for disturbing the peace. All right. And as I sat in the car, then that's when another student come out the building. She saw me and she asked me, she said, "Gary," she said, she said, "They arrested you for shooting anybody, not shooting a white guy." I said, that's when the first time I heard that somebody was shot, really. So I said, "No, So I know I was arrested for, you know, for interfering in police officers' duty, as they stated. So no big deal with me." So as time went on, that's when eventually transported me to the substation as New Salt Pete. And and the next thing you know, they put a kid in the vehicle with me by the name of Jenkins. They arrested him, the same officer that arrested me, for calling him an Uncle Tom. And the guy, Uric Smith, who had went to school with me, he was arrested for calling, you understand, because the guy said he called him an Uncle Tom too. So as I sat in the car with the guy, Jenkins, eventually after they finished shaking out all the kids on the bus, and you could see them going back and forth on the bus. Then that's when they came and got Jenkins and came and got me and brought me in a room. And that's when I saw Uric Smith, the guy who went to school, who was basically dropped off at the school by VJ St. Pierre. We're in the room, and that's when the guy took him, you know, the guy went to questioning him to write him up. Then when the guy got to me, he asked me my name and how old I was. I gave him my name, and I told him I was 16 years old. And just out of nowhere, he just went ballistic. He went to cursing me out and stuff like that, telling me why I did not tell him that I was 16 years old. And I told him, I said, "You just asked me," and I told him my age. You know, one thing led to another. He left, and we sitting in there, and the next thing you know, the same officer who dropped us off, put us out his car, VJ St. Pierre, he walked in and he saw Uric Smith and I. And that's when he came in. And that's when he asked us why didn't we go home like he told us to? And one thing led to another. And that's when he went to beating on me. He went to punching me. It was just out of nowhere. And then that's when they separated the both of us. And they moved him to another room. And VJ St. Pierre, the police officer, along with several others, that's when they commenced beating on me. And he asked for something to beat me with. And one officer gave him this flapjack. He said, "That's all I got is a flapjack." So he took that. And that's when he went to hitting me in my head, my face, my shoulder. And one thing led to another. And then that's when the officer who earlier had an encounter with in Preston Hollow, Joe Giglio, that's when the officer told him, said, "Listen, so they got parents out here and they can hear what's going on in this room. So y'all gonna have to bring that somewhere else." So that's when they grabbed me, picked me up. Literally, I was a little small guy at that time. And they physically kind of like, toted me out the room. But in order to bring me to another room, we had to go through this lobby. And in the lobby, at the desk is where the parents were standing, trying to get their children. Now they done heard this beating in the back. They done heard me screaming and hollering, but they didn't know who exactly it was. They didn't know whether it was their child or someone else's child. So you just can imagine how petrified they were. But when I exit that room, the first face I saw was my mother. And I saw the fear, the petrification in my mother's face, that she saw how badly beaten I was. I was bleeding and everything. And my mother went to pleading out to them, Mister, officer, can I talk to someone? And that's when DJ St. Pierre responded to my mother that he don't want to hear nothing. He's gonna find out who killed his cousin. He don't want to talk to nobody. So they brought me in the back room, and of course they continued to beat on me in the back room. And one thing led to another. That's when they asked me a few questions about who I thought that probably was possibly who was capable of doing something like that. I told them I don't know anyone's capability. You understand? Who you think that did it? I said I don't know. You understand? And then they asked me, say, how old are you? I said 16 years old. So they said, call your mother and tell your mother to bring your gift certificate. Excuse me, your birth certificate. And so I called my mother, and she brought my birth certificate. She brought the hat, clothing I had, top, of course, gloves. Because they asked me where, what the remainder of my clothes was at. Because they don't buy it, and they don't kind of like the little body shirt I had, they kind of like tore that off me by beating me. So I told my mother to bring everything that I gave her. You understand? And she brought it in. As soon as my mother and my father walked in that room, just imagine, you know, seeing your child. When your child left home that morning, your child was glee, happy, healthy. You understand? And when they saw me, especially my mother, she couldn't really handle it. She was appalled by what they have done, what they had done to me. And my father, I mean, as a man who worked so hard to support his family and to protect his family, he felt helpless. He couldn't do anything. And
So let me jump in here a little bit
yes,
and forward our story a little bit. So I'm really curious. I mean, I see here that it says that you were charged with killing a white teenager, and
yes,
then you're found guilty by an all-white jury, and of course it's Louisiana in 1974, 1975. So that's
yeah,
not completely shocking, although we're kind of getting out of that period.
right.
And then you end up becoming the youngest death row prisoner in America. Uh, I mean, that must have been some, turn of events for you.
Yes, it was. It's definitely. I mean, I've always was under the impression, even as a young kid, that America had the best criminal judicial system in the world. All right, and there was no other system like it. So I think, I felt that I was gonna be found not guilty. Whatever it is I was convicted of, they indicted me for first degree murder for something I didn't do. But I felt after the attorney telling me, oh, they're gonna eventually let you go. They don't have nothing on you. They know you didn't do it. I believe my attorney, but of course my attorney was blowing smoke up my ass by telling me that. You understand? Plain and simple. And but I believed it until I went to trial, and having very kids that I grew up with, that I knew, get on the witness stand. perjured themselves by lying. And
Mm.
I mean, that was quite shocking. And that's when, I mean, I really start losing hope. I really start having a different take on that they were aiming to find me guilty and to kill me. And sure enough, that's what happened, Dave. They found me guilty of first degree murder, and automatically I got the death penalty.
And let me, um, we've covered a lot of wrongful convictions on this program, as you might imagine. And what sets this story apart is, this isn't a story about mistaken identity. It's not a story about circumstantial evidence, but this was really about systemic injustice and the fact that, they were looking to get you. This wasn't an accident, right?
Yes. You know, and, and you never you never know until you get yourself caught up in a situation that spoken words can really mark you. It can really label you. People could misjudge you, and people can perceive you as a dangerous person, even as a 16-year-old kid. And not really knowing the relic of the South as I do now, historically speaking, that Black people, people of color was being killed, you understand, just by speaking up.
Yep.
And I found myself in that very situation. They weren't concerned about who actually did, because if they did, I wouldn't have been in the situation that I was in.
Right.
But it was just the mere fact that this kid, smart as smart mouthed us, he was out of his place. And that's the way they treated me. He acted the way he acted, so he got to be guilty. If he didn't do it, well, then he gonna take this responsibility. He gonna be guilty for it. So it was one of those things where it was appalling. And I found myself in a situation that I mean, I never imagined at that time.
Right. So, can you kind of describe what it was like to be at Angola at that time? I mean, is it as bad as they say? Is it worse than they say?
Well,
Kind of
let
tell
me
that story.
let me say is that the things that I heard about the prison was already scary. But I felt that the things that I was hearing as a kid was an understatement until I got there. When I got to Angola, it was more than the things that I heard that was happening at this prison. Imagine being in the cell and almost 48 hours after being, you understand? I mean, a few days after being in prison, that you hear this scream while late at night, and it sounds as though like it's on a tier that you confined on, and you get up and you see this flame, this ball of fire. You see a man engulfed in fire, and you know right then and there that could be you. That can happen to you. How could you defend yourself against something like that? Yes, to me, that was an opening to welcome to Hard Knocks, Angola, up close in person.
And you were a kid at this point.
Yes, kid fighting for his life. You understand? And
Yeah.
here I'm witness this terror going on around me. How could I defend myself? I didn't
So
know anybody.
how did you survive this?
You know, you never know who who's around you. The men that I saw on the tier that I was on, these guys, I mean, they were individuals who who lived their life. They were men who had murdered other men in prison. They were men who had brutally beaten other men. These were men who was that security felt that they were incorrigible. These individuals was a danger to prison, so they locked them up in maximum security. And I was, I didn't know these men. I was afraid of these men. These men didn't look like they were friendly. But they always say that there's always an angel watching over you. That by the mere fact of me being as young as I was and hear men, despite the lives that they lived in prison, that before they went to prison, there were men that had families. There were men that left their children behind. There were men that would never be able to be a part of their family lives. And when they saw me, I feel it was like an awakening to them, to where this was an opportunity for them to do what was right, because they knew alone I wasn't gonna be able to survive at all. And I always say that I was in this, I experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly. And good, the bad, and the ugly made me who I am today, because the men who lived the life gave me the best of themselves, not the worst of themselves. And that these men became my protectors. I used to always joke that I'm the only guy who entered a prison and had more surrogate fathers and uncles and big brothers than anybody that I know, because these men became family of mine. Those were the ones that gave me a chance to live, gave me a chance to grow as a man in prison, who made sure that I didn't go astray or put myself in a situation where I can lose my life in such dreadful, horrible environment.
So one of the interesting things that I see here is, you know, pretty quickly, a lot of outsiders realized that this was a massive injustice. Amnesty International investigative reporters documented a lot of the problems here. Three times you end up recommended for a pardon, but the Louisiana governors are not profiles encourage.
Mm-mm.
And then eventually you get out, but you're not exonerated, you're just released. So tell me about kind of some of those stories there.
You know, of course, I wasn't one of those that sat on my duff in prison and felt that eventually I'm going to be exonerated. Eventually, I'm going to be released. I knew one thing: after being around these guys, that I had to put some work in. All right, I had to concentrate on myself. I had to become the best that I can be while I'm in prison, and take advantage of all the opportunities that I can, because eventually will come around where I will be judged by the very things that I do in prison. So I invested in myself, and at the same time, I worked to help others. And, and of course, I mean, I persistently and consistently fought to get out of prison. But I knew one thing, that I couldn't I couldn't really preoccupy myself with that, because there were things that around me that I had to also be a part of as well. You understand? And I got involved. I got involved in organizational activities. I got involved in a whole lot of things in prison. And at the same time, I focused on getting out of prison. All right. And thanks to Brian Stevenson and the slew of lawyers that who was fighting in the best interest of juveniles, because statistically, young kids serve more time in state prison than adult offenders. And I was in a state in which case other states as well prohibited parole for juveniles. And Brian Stevenson, they brought it before the United States Supreme Court with Graham, you understand, versus when they fought that case where it was stated that you cannot give a juvenile a life sentence without giving them any meaningful possibility of ever getting out of prison for a non-homicidal case. Due to what? Due to the inability of a young person at that time, not maturely, intellectually mature, to decide, to make discernment about right and wrong. And that case itself catapulted Miller versus Alabama, you understand, to where it is cruel and unusual to incarcerate a young person without giving them any meaningful possibility of ever getting out of prison. You understand? For a homicidal crime. And
Right.
that what cracked that door for me and others to get out of prison. That was an opportunity that I never thought that would ever happen, especially in the state of Louisiana.
Right. And you also work with people like Albert Woodfox. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You know, when I mention about angels, Albert, Herman, Robert Wilkerson, Niadibo, and several other guys, those guys I consider intellectual geniuses in prison.